We're going to get started with a question that was inboxed to us. She said, in sexual intimacy between a husband and a wife, how does a couple figure out what are acceptable sexual things to do together and what are sinful things? There are things we might want to do but are unsure if they're pure or not.
Totally. Yeah, this is a common question that folks have. They want to honor the Lord with their life. They know that sex is God's idea and He designed it, and they've sought to try to honor God with their sexuality as a single person. Now they're married and they're enjoying and wanting to explore things in their sexual relationship as a married couple, but have gotten the message, over the years and from the church that, the sex is really dirty, ugly, sinful, it's bad, save it for the one you love. And so there's been a whole lot of kind of don't. So now we're married and it's like, okay, but do what? Is it okay? Is it not okay? And so there just can be a lot of anxiety and fear and questions around that. And so I get that question routinely from folks that are just wanting to navigate through and try to understand what do the scriptures say and what's healthy and good in relationship. And the truth is, if you look to the scriptures story, what does the Bible, from your understanding of it, define as the correct way to do sex? You have a chapter and verse that you reference?
I don't have a chapter and verse that I reference, but I know based on what I have read that sex is good and it is God's design.
Yeah, totally. So a trick question, right? There isn't a chapter or verse. I have an undergrad in biblical languages, know the Bible pretty well. There's no chapter and verse that you can point to and look to that will give you like the correct way to do sex or to connect sexually, right? But instead there's a communication about the heart of God and some principles around God's design of sexuality that we take into consideration when thinking about engaging sexually. So I think the most helpful way I have for talking folks through this is to think about three concentric circles. When I'm working with clients, I'll draw a picture and they'll make fun of what a terrible artist I am. But if you can imagine like three overlapping circles, right? And one circle kind of represents God and His thoughts about sex and His design for sexuality and all the things that He has knows about and has created as possibilities for our sexual experience, right? And then the next circle kind of represents kind of God's or a husband's desires and thoughts about sexuality. And the third circle would represent a wife's desires and thoughts about sexuality. If you move those circles to where they're overlapped, you're going to find a few different domains. You're going to find the area that are the things that maybe the husband thinks he would like to explore or engage, but they fall outside of God's design and thoughts about sexuality, and they fall outside of what his wife's comfortable, right? And so there's that area. And on the other side, there's a domain where they're the things that the wife is maybe interested in or wants to explore, but they fall outside of God's design and outside of what the husband's comfortable with. And so there's that area. Correspondingly, there's a section of God's circle or the things that He's thought about sex that neither of you have thought about before. You haven't even discovered our possibilities, but are within the scope of His thoughts and design for sexuality. And then we have this area that's the overlap of God's circle and the husband's circle, and the things that the husband would like to explore and engage, and they're perfectly within God's design for sexuality, but they're outside of what's comfortable for the wife. And she's not able to go and enjoy and engage that at this point in time. And so there's that area, and correspondingly an area where the things that the wife would be interested in exploring, engaging, and fall within God's design and His thoughts about sex, but the husband isn't comfortable with, right? And then we have this sweet spot where the three circles overlap with each other, right? And this is the space that falls within God's design and is something both husband and wife are interested in and comfortable exploring. Now, husband and wife could be on the same page about something in it, and it could be outside of God's design also, right? That maybe we've heard about swinging and think it would be fun to engage that with another couple and see what that's about. But it's outside of God's design for monogamy within the marital relationship, right? And so even though husband and wife would be in agreement, it still wouldn't be inside the scope of God's design for sexuality. And even in these areas where it's inside of God's design, but it's not comfortable with for our spouse, there's this recognition that we need to have that God's designed sex to be something that's mutually enjoyable for us, right? That God has given us a sexual relationship to be able to enjoy together, bring us together, to represent the passion that Christ has for his bride and the kind of connection and intimacy that he desires to have with us. And so to kind of browbeat or to guilt trip or to try to drag your spouse into engaging something that's not comfortable for them, isn't fun for them, isn't respectful of kind of where they're at, is way outside the lines of God's heart when it comes to our sexual relationship. And so we really want to focus in on exploring that space that can be mutually enjoyable for both husband and wife and can feel safe and fun to explore, and kind of falls within that domain of being respectful to one another, versus kind of sexual behavior that feels demeaning or degrading to one spouse or the other, that's monogamous and faithful in terms of the covenant relationship that sexuality is designed to be expressed and experienced together within, and that we can both have fun with it, right? That it doesn't create a dynamic that feels like it takes away from the value of one spouse or the other. That's kind of the space in which there's a lot of freedom to explore and to learn about one another and to learn about yourself, and to recognize that those circles aren't fixed. God's circle doesn't change, but ours can move. That in an ideal or perfect world, both the husband circle and the wife circle would move to perfectly overlap with God's circle, and we would be able to fully enjoy all the things that God has designed for us to be able to enjoy, and for it to be mutual and fun and a great thing for both of us. But you can't drag or force your spouse into engaging in ways sexually that aren't comfortable for them. Like, that's not honoring to God's design and not how he wants us to work. But if you create safety within the relationship to explore and to experiment with different things, oftentimes what you'll find is over time that those circles shift, and things that maybe we were uncomfortable with or nervous about or couldn't mutually enjoy at one point in time, that we become more comfortable with, get more comfortable in our own skin, get more comfortable with each other, and feel more freedom to be able to engage and explore in different activities. So
Yeah. Something that you mentioned was just, where you're at, you know what I mean? Like that circle can change, right? And I go back to, I've been married a little over 9 months, and I go back to, when we first got married, you're coming out of this dating relationship, this engaged season where you're trying really hard to avoid situations that make you uncomfortable, or that put you in a place where you don't want to sin, you want to be pure and all of these things. And it can be very difficult. I feel like it was for us, going into marriage and trying to find that new normal, and what's okay now, and on kind of shifting that mindset that I think that we had before we were married.
Yeah, absolutely. That shifting out of that kind of single mindset into where you're trying to have boundaries with one another in terms of what you're engaging in and how you're engaging physically, to what it means to explore freedom together, and to just work through all the kind of personal insecurities that are part of that, right? That it's hard to recognize or accept that you're supposed to be really lousy at sex when you get married, like by design, and that not knowing kind of how to engage or how to engage each other, and for it to be awkward and for it to be exciting but scary, All of that is just a really normal part of learning to connect sexually. That even if we've been married previously or have had sexual experiences previously, that sex is a very personal thing, that we learn to connect with our spouse, the person that we're with, and they're different than any other person on the planet. And that we have to learn each other, and really healthy, intimate sexual relationship comes from us getting to know each other more and more and feeling safer and more comfortable with each other.
Right, right. And that comfort level just sort of shifts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's so natural, that comfort level changes, as you adjust to the new way of life, the new mindset that you have together.
Yeah, and it evolves over time. That the way God designed the marital relationship as well as the sexual relationship inside of marriage is that year after year it would be more intimate, that it would be more sweet, that it would be more fun. And in the same way that our intimacy with God is inexhaustible, that we can never fully know God, that we can never stop learning new things about God, there's a reflection of that within the marital relationship. That there's always this evolving as we change as people and as we grow and mature as human beings, that we're always learning our spouse and experiencing our spouse in new ways. That we can continue to have a freshness in our relationship, in our marriage as a whole, as well as in our sexual relationship, no matter how many years we've been married or how long we've been enjoying life together. It's just a really cool way marriage reflects the divine marriage between us and Christ. It's a really cool thing.